Good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance. After Nancy's talk, I thought, well, maybe I should, restructure my presentation and start from the bottom and move all the way backwards. And then I thought, well, I'm not quite prepared for that. So I'll give you the talk in order. I'm excited to present this research. It's a project that Professor Van Wilgen and I have been working on in collaboration with folks at Cape Nature and Sand Parks to essentially assess the state of invasion in protected areas of the Cape Floristic Province. These are very preliminary estimates. I just want to stress that. We've made a lot of assumptions initially. I just started working on this project about 4 months ago when I arrived here from the States. So it's kind of a first cut at the assessment, and we'll be working on honing those methods that we used and our assumptions and checking the data. So I welcome your input for sure. Please, questions and comments on this work are much appreciated. I just want to acknowledge off the bat Nicolette Oliver of Cape Nature and Andrew Vandenberg of Working for Water for their assistance with data collection and helping with the methods as well, and funding sources, collaborators. This is not possible without them, that's for sure. So fynbos is the dominant vegetation type in the Western Cape Floristic region. And so we're concerned primarily with assessing the state of invasion and costing what it would take to clear the invasives at their current extent in fynbos protected areas. So fynbos is a dominant, it's a shrubby vegetation type with many endemic species, very global biodiversity hotspot, and many of the species require fires every decade or so. Many of them are reseeders, serotinous reseeders, and so they require fire to maintain this diversity. And this is to give you an idea, this is the extent of the Western Cape Floristic region. And as you can see here in blue, this is the extent of fynbos. So you can see how much of the Cape Floristic region it covers. And so this was the area that we're primarily concerned with. And there are a number of genera that are invasive in fynbos. And we focused on 6 of the most problematic genera. Pines and hakeas tend to, their seeds are opened by fire, and so they're prolific reseeders after fire. Acacias have a very long-lived seed bank. They're resprouters, as many of you know. They're particularly difficult to eradicate. Eucalypts, they don't spread so much, but they're also problematic, as well as these other genera. So we focused on assessing the invasion of these species in fynbos, these genera in fynbos protected areas. This is an image to show you, this is from Garden Roots, how pines can just take over the landscape. These spread from nearby plantations that were begun in the 1900s, and the fire helps them spread just rapidly up the mountains. It's a big problem. That's just a closer up view of all the pine invasion up the slopes from that plantation. And acacias are very problematic along rivers as well. Just look at that density. It's really astonishing. And this is an issue because pines can increase the fire intensity when fires go through. Stream flow reductions are a very serious problem. Stream flow can be reduced by as much as 22% in some catchments. Obviously, biodiversity loss, invasives suppress native species, and there are also soil nutrient changes that can occur as a result of invasion. So it's a serious problem. And in 1995, Working for Water was that national level program was begun as part of Department of Environmental Affairs and Forestry to protect water resources. Stream flow was a big focus, and create jobs. So the idea was that these invaded areas would be contracted out, and local people, people of rural impoverished areas would be employed to clear these areas, and project managers would report that area that was cleared, how many people were employed, how many follow-ups. And in 2002, the costs as well began to be recorded in a database, which we call WIMS, or Working for Water Information Management System. So from 2002 on, we have records of the areas that were cleared. And between 95 and 2012, the budget increased. The annual expenditure increased from millions to billions. So this program has really expanded. This is just to show you. I took this picture actually this year in one of my study areas, where the Working for Water team is clearing a very steep slope that's been invaded by pines. That's more of a close-up. It's usually about 11 workers who work on these projects, and here they are all hard at work clearing those invasive pines. You can see the density, though, very, very incredible. So over 95 to 2008. In 2008, an assessment was done on how much had been spent. 3.2 billion rands in 2008 rands had been spent on this, clearing invasives. But you can see estimates in 96 and 2008. Kind of see how similar these estimates are. Granted, they didn't use the exact same methods, but the similarity of their estimates suggests that there's not a big decrease in this issue. It could be increasing, but suggests that there's no decrease. And an estimate in 2004 indicated that it could take up to about 63 years to clear these major groups across South Africa. So it's an issue. Can't stress that enough. So our objectives were to focus on famous protected areas in the Cape Floristic region and assess the current state of invasion. What do we have there now? This hasn't been done for this region before. And estimate what will it take to bring this problem under control as it stands now. And then to look at what are the current practices, what should we look at, and to come up with recommendations for addressing this. So have a critical look at this. So I'm presenting our current assessment, our first cut, and the resources that we estimate it will take to clear the invasions in these areas. So this is the study area again, and this is a map of the protected area network. So both Cape Nature managed areas and South African national parks. There were 22 provincial Cape Nature areas that we looked at, and then 3 national parks: Garden Route, Agulhas, and Table Mountain National Park. And what we got, the data, we had maps of each of these protected areas, national parks, and each one was divided up into management subunits. So this here, the arrow, sorry if that's a little bit faded, it's pointing to a subunit. And for each compartment or subunit, we had an estimate of the density of each of the genera, and to which we assigned a method of clearing. That's one of our assumptions. We assumed if you use this method of clearing, it would take this many, it would require this amount of effort, person days per hectare, which we obtained from Working for Water's norms and standards. Based on this density, this method, this is the effort that it will take to clear them. And from that, you can calculate unadjusted person days for that compartment, which is the area times the person days, and you get unadjusted person days. But of course, that's very simplistic. That doesn't take into account things like slope, the walking time, the driving time. So we included those in an adjusted person days calculation. Which don't worry about, deciphering all of that, but it just shows you how we included walk time, which we calculated as the distance to the center of that compartment from the road, a straight line distance from the nearest town to the center of that compartment was our drive time, and then a slope, which again is in a slope factor. You multiply it by that to account for 10-degree increases in slope, which you can also get from Working for Water's norms and standards. So we got adjusted person days for each compartment, and we used those to calculate our wages. We included the cost of herbicides for those genera. We got an average cost per liter for herbicides to clear certain genera in that compartment. And then also, some of these slopes are very, very steep, greater than 40 degrees, and that actually necessitates high altitude teams to come in and clear those. And the costs for high altitude teams are way more than the normal costs for teams on, accessible slopes. So to take into account the walking time, some of these areas are far away from roads, far away, they're not accessible, steep slopes. We multiplied each compartment cost by a factor of 2 if these were within a day's travel and were very steep. We kept them the same if they weren't very steep and they were within a day's travel, so just to kind of accommodate the differences in accessibility in costing it. And then we compared that estimate for the compartment to for the area, for the given protected area, to the amount that had been spent on the genera in those protected areas to date. So I mentioned that these costs, the amount spent, had only been recorded since 2002. We used the Consumer Price Index and the proportion of working forwarders' budget that have been allocated to these areas every year to basically estimate how much had been spent previously. So yes, so those were our methods, our assumptions, and this picture just to show you the steep slopes. I don't think Brian was a bit skeptical. He didn't really think that this was quite a 40-degree slope, but I've hiked up this slope and it's very steep. To have to clear something off those slopes, it takes a lot. So that's just to give you an idea. So our results, comparing the current expenditure, about 549 million rand, to what we estimated to about 2.2 billion rand to clear these invasives in famous protected areas. And consider that over the course of its career, Working for Water has spent maybe 3.2 billion rand across South Africa. So again, this is a first cut, but that's quite a large sum. And then just to break it down, we haven't quite finished assessing the future control costs for these 4 genera, but looking at 2 of the major genera, this is what has been spent, we estimate has been spent to date on acacia and pines, compared to what might be required to control them in the future. About the same amount that has already been spent for acacias and a little more for pines, very similar. And I have this down here, if you include our assumptions of the cost of herbicides, it will require much more to clear the acacias. So then we were just interested in quickly, really rough cut, checking out maybe the trajectory of, if you assume that with this projected cost, if you assume that you want to clear 5% of the original invaded area per year, and you over 20 years, so you divide that initial 2.2 billion by 20, you say this is going to clear that much, 5% of the original area every year for 20 years, and you assume a 2% spread rate, thank you, in the invasions, this is probably what you're looking at as far as the trajectory. You can make a substantial dent. If you double the current amount of funding, you'll also make a dent over 20 years. But at current levels of funding, it's going to take quite a long time to clear the invasions. And interestingly enough, this is very sensitive to the spread rate. So if you then assume a 3% increase in invasive alien plants per year, at current levels of funding, the state of invasion actually increases, and even more for a 4% increase. And then it's going to take even longer to make a dent in clearing the invaded area. So just to point out again some of our assumptions that are also critical in assessing how we're approaching this issue, we're assuming that 3 follow-ups are enough. So I neglected to mention that in our cost estimates, we also included not only initial cost of clearing, but also of following up those areas 3 times later. Assuming that the plants are only spreading at 2%, that we'll be able to get to remote areas, that the work will be carried out diligently, professionally, we'll be following the methods. You apply that herbicide to these plants No corruption. It's a big assumption. The funding will continue for another 20 years. Big assumption. So based on those, just some quick recommendations. A big one is that maybe instead of just, say, picking out areas that are invaded and this looks good, here you go here, to really focus our efforts. Where should we prioritize our efforts and direct the money there where we can make a difference? So focus on protected areas. These areas are protected. They've already been set aside. Focus on clearing those. Those areas that you can't save, leave them. It's going to be a waste of money to clear someplace that you can't even follow up on either. So focus on protected areas, leave those that can't be saved, follow up, maintain them, keep them clear. Also the approaches, consider that a large sum is going to have to go to high altitude areas. It's apparent in some of these areas that they're only cleared so far up the slopes, and then you're left with a seed source, say pines on the upper slopes, that can just reseed down. And if you don't clear and maintain, it's just going to come back and be a problem. Continue to investigate biological control as an option. That'll also increase our ability to address, areas to address a greater area of invasion, and also to include fire. That can also cut back on costs. And again, building capacity in these fire protection associations, conservation agencies, empowering them, communicating, funding obviously is a big issue. And to be sure that we specify our goals, set targets, and focus on achieving those. So monitoring our progress, evaluating, adapting these approaches. And with that, I don't mean to conclude with a depressing slide, but just to show you, you can have these beautiful areas. This is actually a patch of pines that have been left high up. Remote, high altitude teams will have to go out there and clear those. So you can get it to, you can clear. It's just focusing to make sure that we do a comprehensive job in these areas and focus on being effective and addressing this issue. So thank you very much.